Please be seated. Well, today, as you've just heard, is Good Shepherd Sunday. It is also Earth Day. So there's a lot to cover and not a lot of time. And I have one more thing I want to talk about besides that. And it was the rector's birthday yesterday. We don't often get to celebrate things like that in places like this because there's so many of us. So that's something to know. We should be very grateful to the father and mother of Dr. Lupfer for their very good idea, right? Good Shepherd Sunday. Among the most tender images in the text is the Good Shepherd. It is the archetype of the one that cares for God's people, for the people of Israel. And Psalm 23 is the archetype of God with us. I don't know about you, but for people like me that grew up in the church, Psalm 23 is one of the first things I remember saying out loud. I remember being in church. I know it. I know it from funerals. Right? I know it from Sundays like this. I know the King James Version, which is so beloved even among those who put together the prayer book we have, that it's the exception, right? Our Psalms, the version of the Psalms that we have in our prayer book has a slightly different translation, but they take the King James Version of Psalm 23 and put it in the burial office because it is the one we all know by heart. It is the language of our hearts, interestingly enough, right? So that's the one I know how to rattle off, and we all know it. It's about as tender as you can get, and in this week as every week, but this week especially, of so many deaths and funerals and watching those occasions happen in public, that is the language that returns to us, right? The tender language of Psalm 23, the Lord is my shepherd. In my mind, Psalm 23, about midway through the service or at the end of a funeral service, says that God is with us. We are not to fear. And if I really let my mind go, God is with us, we are not to fear because we are protected. But interestingly, the text doesn't actually say that, right? Psalm 23, it's a wonderful start. The Lord is my shepherd. So right from the beginning, it proves and sort of illustrates for us the problem of translation. In the Hebrew scripture, there is no name of God. It cannot be said or understood or verbalized. And through Greek and Latin, we get the Lord. And the Lord, in the context that we come from, is a thing, right? Is a particular idea and constrains God to how our world works, or how at least the world in Europe worked. Most of us Americans don't have lords, right? But it was a thing, a very concrete idea, that God is like a lord. And actually, because we don't use metaphor often, it sounds like God is Lord. Lord is God, right? It is how we simplify and organize how that language could work for us. But this shepherd, David, who sings the song of the shepherd, of the Good Shepherd, would have had no idea of a God like that. The God of the Hebrew people is wild and unpredictable, beyond naming, beyond living, beyond us. It's hard for us to recall sometimes in the language that we have in our text that that's who God is. This is the God that we say, like our ancestors, we seek to acknowledge, understand, worship, be faithful towards. So this wild God, in this tender, tender reading, like a shepherd keeping sheep safe, doesn't actually effectively keep them safe, does the shepherd? I don't even know the gender of the shepherd now that I've gone here, right? It actually is that even in time of trouble, in front of your enemies, those that seek to harm you, a banquet is spread, it says. And this is how God is with us in that most tender of Psalms. A banquet is spread in the presence of your enemies. Now, the American version of that shepherd probably gets an AK-47 or something, right? And no enemies for us, good guys. But that's actually not how it happens in this reading. And then as you see, as we move into John, it is that the shepherd is so vulnerable that the shepherd might have to lay down their own life. That's some pretty ineffective shepherding in the end, and then everybody's vulnerable, right? What a strange thing we have. As I think for Christians, the most tender of images we have for being led and for leading. So besides that it was the rector's birthday, it actually points a little bit to something that we try to do here as well, right? What does leadership look like? And so there are a couple of levels at which to think about this. So one is that it's Earth Day. We're going to talk about the earth and our responsibilities toward it. And one is that we as a community, those that are sitting in this room, maybe not everyone on the webcast, are about to go through some changes here about how and where we pray, which in a church community can be among the most painful, surprisingly painful. And we need to be able to talk and experience it, like to be in it, and to be in it together if we're to do it as well as we should. Because however long this rejuvenation takes, we can't put our lives on hold, or the work of social justice on hold, or our compassion, or our prayer on hold until it's over. We can't. We have to be surging forward with a vision for the future while this is happening. And then finally, because we've had so much time here this week, at least I have, at Trinity, to think about prisons and Rikers Island and what comes of how we imprison people here in New York. I want to tell you a little bit about that as well, but just a little bit. So Earth Day. We have a beautiful river that we get to see almost every day if you live down here. It's a beautiful river right there, the Hudson. It's exquisite. It has had some tougher times than it's having now, but it's not quite exactly where we'd like it to be. And most of us New Yorkers are pretty proud that we can order water from the tap in a restaurant and open those taps in your building and drink that water. And we can bathe in it without thinking twice. We have clean, fresh water from a beautiful river that comes from up high in the mountains. What a fortunate thing in this time. What a natural and obvious thing in other times. The place where my parents are from, the water like that comes from the Periyar River, again, from a very high place, and it goes out to the ocean just like this. Millions of people, like here, are dependent upon that water. And like here, but slightly differently, that water has been polluted over the years. The usual things, right? Factories, more industry than the river can actually bear, because water can handle some difficulty, right? It can handle a little bit of our waste, it can handle a little bit of our mismanagement, but it can't handle all of it. And we can take it too far, and we have. We have there, we have here. And some of that is just litter. You know, you drop things, people throw plastic away. We don't have a good end result of where we throw away our garbage. And so in India, it's interesting, there are river keepers. It's called River Keeper at the Periyar River. There's a group that does that, somehow through Greenpeace back in the day, but not anymore. And we have River Keeper here. Right, some of our folks with David Ward and others from that committee are going to go out and literally pick up the waste from the side of the river. And it can seem like a futile act in the end, right? It's 30, 40 of us, maybe 50, maybe 20, doing our best all day long, but we see the little patch that clears, and we see how much we don't clear, right, if you have any perspective at all. And you see, and we're aware of what other kind of grand waste comes into the system, much more than we could do in one day, right? Or even if we went out every Saturday. It's tough. On the Periyar River, same huge flowing river, the river itself is starting to die, which is not the case here for us. And you can tell that it's dying. The color is off. It's not moving as fast as it used to. But there are canals and little tributaries that feed in and off of this river. And so the fact that it's dying has meant that the well levels have dropped. So people that had water for free no longer have water. And it means these little tributaries are just blocked. They're just chock full of weird green, and they're kind of dank and stagnant. This beautiful, clean water is no longer beautiful or clean. And so the process that has been moved by people locally to clean it is to actually physically clean it with their hands. This is not what we would choose to do in this country, right? I don't know that there are gloves thick enough for that to feel like a smart thing to do. But they did, as I've told you before, a couple of hundred people decided to do this, organized by one guy, a couple of years ago, and over the course of hundreds of days of just lining up across the canal and picking up what they could, hundreds of days, volunteer activity, at some point, the water started to run again. It just picked up a little bit of energy. And after the water started to move again, started to run again, and there was still plenty to clean up, the well level started to rise at a distance from this water. Right, that the system itself was able to work again because of the effort, the very simple and modest effort of these people equipped with nothing but clearing the water with their own hands. And recently this was done with 10,000 people on a different spot, and the same effect started to happen, that literally the water started to run again. It's a beautiful image for what it means to do what we can do in the place that we are, especially when it's not enough, because frankly, it is never enough, is it? We don't have power in the ways that we want to have it, right? We don't know how to change what we want to change. We can see what seems harmful to others, but how do we get in? How can we be of use beyond the little bit that we feel that we can manage? What a wonderful idea that actually, if we can get to it enough, the things as they should be, the way that nature should work, might actually take over. And so we are called to tend to what we have. It is actually one of the first, if not the first commandment in many ways, that we are to be stewards of this earth, all of us. It is actually our work. And whether that means for you with your hands, or with your letters, or with your phone calls, with your advocacy, just to be clear, it is our work. Weirdly, steward, shepherd, all sort of the same idea. We are to care for it. And it doesn't mean that we can solve everything, but we can stand alongside and do our part. And the banquet is prepared. We know that. So Rikers is more complicated, right? Prisons are more complicated. I've been learning a lot about Rikers since I've come to Trinity, because for our grants program, there have been people approaching us about doing some work to close it. I had no idea that was really a thing that could happen. And I had no idea how horrible Rikers was until I came here and started to do this work. I had seen the film. I'm not sure I paid attention in the way that I should have. I didn't get it. I have to be honest, I really didn't get it. I didn't get that we could end it. But we can, and there's good work. There's a commission of very, very learned people, able people, experienced people in this city that have put together the proposals for how we do it. And it's serious work. It's not small work. But the scandal of it is that people that have made a mistake, and sometimes police officers that have made a mistake, end up going to jail, right? You get arrested, you go to jail. A jail, differently than a prison, means that it's for a short time. A prison means you're there for a long time. And you go to Rikers Island, which is off of LaGuardia. It's over by LaGuardia. One of the uses that they can see for it in the future is to be an additional runway for LaGuardia. It's that close to LaGuardia. But if you are not lucky enough to have a lawyer or family or friends that are going to pay bail for you and get you out of there while you wait for your trial, you stay. And you stay in a place that since the 1930s has been written about as one of the most violent, appalling places in our country, paid for by our tax dollars. For people imprisoned and for people that work there, appalling. Nothing about human dignity, human life is honored there in the way that the place is built and structured. Horrible. And just so we understand, it means that if you cannot pay bail, you sit there and wait for your trial. And as you know from the Khalif Browder story, for him, he was a child when he went in. That was 6 years for possibly stealing a backpack, but we don't know because the charges were dropped after 6 years. And 6 years, if we take aside just the basic denial of liberty and freedom, right, which is a problem, but the horrible abuse that happened there and the solitary confinement he was in led him to such a state of despair that in his freedom he killed himself. And it might be, hopefully it's the last time this happens at Rikers, but it might be the story that in some ways took us over the edge. A backpack. Can you imagine if you and I were known for the rest of our lives for a mistake? Can you imagine if you were only known for the worst mistake you made in your life? Or for someone like Khalif Browder, just a stupid thing, a mistake. It's not a life that most of us have to worry about, but each time I talk about this here at Trinity Church, and every church I've been in, someone comes up to me afterwards to say, I was in prison. I was in jail. And it is never, through all of our stereotyping, who you would think it would be. Never. It happened this morning as well. It is a part of all of our lives. We've created a system, right, that impacts almost all of us, and it is horrific. If we think that the people that live on the earth, like the water in the river, are essential, like the blood in our veins, to the life of these communities that are ours, that we are called to steward, to shepherd, then it can't be that we short-circuit, that we block life after life after life, and don't feel it, don't feel that stagnation in our culture. We cannot be who we must be if this is what we allow. What is remarkable about that work is we could end it. We can change it. It could change in 10 years at the latest, but it will take a lot of work, and we can do it. The shepherd is the iconic image of the leader of God's people and the people of Israel. It is the shepherd. Abraham is a shepherd, right? And a moving shepherd, but a shepherd. Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. Even Joseph and his brothers. And when the people are freed from Egypt, Moses becomes the great shepherd who leads them all the way out. And some of my rabbi friends tell this story, which I have to say, it makes me cry every time I hear it. It's that the people are led out, and they're at the border of the Red Sea, and they stand there in despair. What shall we do now? Free for what? Free to die? And Moses goes and asks God, what should happen now? And God says, go into the sea, I will part it. So Moses says, go into the sea, God will part it. But the way this story is told, it's a midrash. The sea doesn't part. And everybody stands there, waiting for when the sea is parted so that they can walk, because that, of course, would be the sign of the miracle. God with us, we will be fine. And this character called Nakshun starts to walk, and walks right into that Red Sea like a fool, and goes in further and further, and the people are silent behind him as he walks into that sea. And when he gets to the point where it should be over and the water's here, the rabbis say the waters part and the people follow. The Good Shepherd doesn't solve it all for us in advance, but the Good Shepherd has planted in our hearts what it means to be cared for, tenderly, beloved. God tells us this, right? And God tells us this, that in our belovedness, we seek freedom and dignity for ourselves and for all. And when it seems that you are in right over your head, know that we are all here together, and we are just that close to freedom. Amen.